Everybody, welcome back to the EUVC Podcast. Today with us, we have Georg from REWE Group. One of the things that I always start with is, why is Georg on the podcast? The reason being, REWE is one of the largest retailers in Europe, and then Georg has a very interesting background that we're going to hear about.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Georg, welcome to the show. Looking forward to this. Could you start by just explaining, REWE Group, REWE Venture, what is this all about?
Yeah, I can do that. And thanks for the invitation. I'm also very happy to be here and looking forward to our conversation. Yeah, let's start with REWE Group. I guess in Germany, so everyone who's listening and watching from Germany might know about REWE Group. As you already mentioned, one of the largest European retailer, mainly operating out of Germany and Austria. So retail is one of the biggest parts. We operate supermarkets under the brand of REWE. We also have a discount brand Penny, and in Austria we operate Billa and Bipa, so quite active in this space. But besides retail, what most people don't know is that we also operate in tourism. So we have obviously travel agencies, we operate own hotels, and a lot more. And besides these two business units, we also operate in convenience with the brand of Leckerland, and also DIY markets in the brand of Tom Markets. I mean, I'm usually not a number dropping guy, but to give some perspective, right? So I guess I have to guess because it's changing. We have more than 600-700 companies in our portfolio. We have 350,000 employees and 94 billion revenue last year. So quite a large number, mainly operating again in these strategic business units.
Wow, close to the 100 billion mark. A nice milestone to go for. And Georg, if we then go into more about, what you do, right? Because you are a climate tech guy, but could you just tell us a little bit more? What is your mandate and what does the venture group do within REWE Group?
Let's go back a little bit, but also give you some context. The REWE Group itself, in 2 years, we celebrate 100 years of existence, and REWE Group per se is a cooperative, right? So, and all of this, what we consider being a cooperative, all these values is very large part of our DNA. And this also is important to understand how we operate in our venture unit. So REWE Venture has been implemented a couple of years ago, actually, this by decision. We did quite a few stuff with startups beforehand. We also had actually some own venture building activities, but then it has been structured in 2022, 2023. That's also when I joined REWE, so 2 years ago. And within REWE Venture, our main goal is to get relevant innovation in our group, right? So meaning 100% strategic orientation. And out of this setting, we are not an external unit, which is also, as you know, right, in a lot of other companies, you have an external innovation unit and stuff. So our 4 teams, our 4 focus areas operate from each department or business unit, right? Let's start, because we always start kind of from our left to right logic, and I'm on the last part, climate tech venture. So we have 4 focus areas. The first one is retail tech, meaning everything that is relevant for stores. Here we have a lot of digital AI and other automation topics. So this team is located at REWE Digital, which is one of our companies. And let's say REWE Digital is, if you like, a startup itself. It's very large, but let's say the culture and this whole idea of innovation and R&I is rooted in their DNA. So this is done by REWE Digital. And then we operate in the area of e-grocery, so meaning everything related to delivery. So we operate delivery services, last mile, mobility and stuff. And then the most active one actually in the venture part is food tech, the food tech team. So food tech means self-explaining, deals with products that we will gonna sell. So meaning those startups and those products from the startups will end up in our shelves and we're going to sell them. So they look, for example, at alternative proteins, precision fermentation. They did quite some very interesting deals also in the last couple of years, or let's say last 2 years. And when I joined, the mandate was, let's look at sustainability. As you can imagine, pretty broad. So first step was to kind of narrow it down. We mainly did it by a commitment to SBTI. So since 2023, we started being committed to SBTI goals. So meaning this was my main mandate. So how can we decarbonize? How can we reduce our emissions? And so most of the topics that I look at should help us in our SBTI goals. You can imagine as a retailer, as a main business in retail, 98.5% of our emissions are in scope 3, so meaning supply chain products. The more we sell, the more emissions we create. Even though this is the biggest part and the most relevant part, there's still a very long way to go getting suppliers on board, getting the concrete measures on board. First off, we need to have the data in order to decarbonize. So long story short, this is why we set the focus firsthand on scope 1 and 2, so our own emissions. This is where we have the biggest leverage.
Yeah, can I ask here, so what is the overall REWE Group targets for greenhouse gas emissions?
So we're trying, or we want, and we will hopefully achieve net zero by 2050. And so we have a reduction goal until 2030 and then the rest until 2050. So last 10 years, we also need to neutralize, obviously. It depends on the wording or the definition taxonomy. And again, the biggest part has to be done in our supply chain, but this can't be done without our suppliers. We have quite a few suppliers in the sense of our own brands where we have faster or let's say immediate access, but that's still not the biggest part. Scope 1 and 2, and within scope 1 and 2, I started focusing on topics like the overall bigger climate tech picture of a built environment. So everything related to construction, HVAC, cooling. So cooling is by far the most relevant and also most active topic that I currently look at. And what is really important, especially when we have maybe out of this podcast interview some snippets, right, as you mentioned, is really to say it's not like this official decision done by REWE Group that this is the most relevant in the overall picture, but it's like from my niche perspective, working with internal departments and setting priorities straight, we started dealing with HVAC and alternative materials topics like green concrete, green steel, and so on.
So kind of the barrier between, the department and your colleagues that does e-grocery and you do the climate tech is like mobility is e-groceries and build is with you, right? It depends. If we look at mobility again from a sustainability aspect, I also deal with mobility topics. What maybe also helps to understand is like we differentiate between proactive and reactive topics. I gave the scope about REWE Group. So there are plenty of topics that are relevant for us, right? There are plenty of potential use cases. We really needed to look at not what is the most interesting or trendy or whatever topic out there, but what is the most relevant for us. And most relevant means also like with kind of climate or CO2 leverage. Mobility, yeah, there's a lot we can do. In the overall picture of emissions, it's still a little bit less than, for example, cooling. And this is why we can kind of start it in cooling. Yeah. Just from my understanding, so does REWE Group operate its own cooled warehouses?
We operate warehouses. We operate obviously almost 6,000 stores when it comes to REWE and Penny. We also, when it comes to construction, construction business is very complex. We have general contractor and all this stuff. So we don't build them on our own. We also don't own actually most of the stores. nevertheless, we deal with all of these supplier and all of these projects of building large, what we call large projects, like warehouses, like logistics. And we also build still quite a few stores and also quite a few green building stores. We are very active in green building also.
And for all the startups listening in, right, we're just going to carve it out so you get the right deal flow, right? So what is, investment stage? What is geography for all of these people?
Yeah, so investment stage or sweet spot is definitely like a little bit later, right? I mean, depending on definition, but we start in Series A, with 5 million tickets. Also, we are usually not the lead investor, so you can get kind of an impression of the rounds we are talking about. This is when we talk about direct investments. Let's say the perfect kind of theoretical perfect pathway would be you are maybe a little bit earlier stage startup trying to kind of validate your product. In my case, currently it's mostly hardware, right? It's mostly hardware. I also prefer actually dealing with hardware, not because my background is by far not in hardware, but I mean this like it's said, like it's more tangible than all these software AI topics, because most of the startups, they promise like, we have to talk at this, that 40% with AI and all of this stuff. And I learned that, let's focus on hardware currently. You need to be at least somewhere at TRL 3 to 5 to, let's say, start working with us. What we do next is always when I receive or see any interesting startup or startup solution, I go back to the problem definition of my departments, of my colleagues that I asked beforehand, where's your biggest pain? And then we see if there's a fit. And if there's a fit and we start talking with the startup, we firsthand is 100% focused on technique, right? On the product. This is why my colleagues get on board, and our work together is going very, very well, actually, because we both know, like both parts know where to focus on, right? If we have meetings with startups, I'm always like the guiding, moderating interface. But as soon as it gets to tactics, my colleagues are the experts.
Is it R&D here? Is it R&D that, assist you with the DD and also, post-investment?
Now, if we would continue, let's say, like what I try to describe is pretty much the maybe part of the technical due diligence, if you like, right? Operational due diligence. The colleagues tell me, okay, this is a product that is a fit for us. Because also important to know is we only look at startups where we could be the customer of the product, right? Meaning at the same time, if we would just be the customer, we talk about venture clienting. There's not much needed, right? Here, 9 finished product, okay, we can buy it. We can be your customer. So my job is kind of done. But as soon as we start about strategic cooperations, it needs to be moderated. And coming back to your question, like if, let's say the journey continues and I say, or we both say, okay, there's a product fit. I also find the startup, the business potential, all of this very interesting. We hop on the internal IC to say, okay, this is a startup we want to look at. And then we get approval for DD. And DD is actually then done by our colleagues from M&A. So within our venture teams, and we have the people that are the kind of subject matter experts, or in my case, I'm officially part of the sustainability team. And I have also colleagues from strategy and from M&A joining, and they help me then, if we would go to a DD case, to deep dive. Also, reality check. I mean, as we are not the lead investor, usually, you know how it is, right? We can also relate to DDs from partner investors.
But that is super interesting, right? So you're also describing what you really want from the startup is that they can, become, well, you become the customers of theirs, right? That's kind of the get-go, right? One of the things that we often talk about when we talk about hardware, right, is that it's expensive to develop hardware. And how do you go about that when you then do your investments? Do you do a letter of intent or off-take agreements or anything like that with these startups?
Yeah. And maybe also to add to your question. So yes, we started with the idea can we become the customer of your solution as a relevance check for, yes, this is relevant. At the same time, if I look at the venture part, the operational check is just the beginning and the like approval for relevance. But then actually it's way more interesting if there's business potential, maybe even outside our business units, right? So this is important. And coming back to, because we actually had, I just returned from a call with one of our startups that we're currently working with. They actually have a hardware solution. We are currently testing it together with them. And yeah, it's pretty much their investors would be interested in getting offtake agreements. And yeah, I mean, this could be a possibility, definitely. And at the same time, maybe if this startup is so interesting, also for us in the overall picture, that we are looking for an investment, maybe this is the easier way to, well, maybe not the easier way, but the more practical way to go, right? Instead of saying, here's your offtake agreement so that you get more money from your investors, let's get us on board on the cap table. And besides the money, it's not just the money that we give and then say, okay, goodbye, but we really want to work together, co-develop, maybe if it's helpful, right? Co-develop solutions. So this is why we are a strategic investor. And this is also the task that I have in our team is to, or we have as a team, to kind of highlight the strategic value of an investment, right? What's the difference between just being the customer and giving you 5 million as a startup? And this is what we call a strategic value add, obviously, and what needs to be figured out.
One thing to notice, in my past life, when I was investing for a large corporate, right, we would often do the investment, but also do an LOI or an offtake agreement on certain deliverables, right? So if the company could deliver this product with these capabilities, then we would say, then we are interested in buying, right? It had a good kind of effect on existing investors and also future investors. So I think, that is also why I ask, right? Because it's a super interesting value add to deliver, right? And then I think you're kind of saying, we are a strategic investor, right? So when I dig into this, right, I would imagine that you are a strategic financial investor, because I don't believe that you want to lose money.
No, obviously. No one wants to lose money, right? But let's put it like this. The strategic relevance in the sense of that they help us with their product to achieve our goals. In my case, decarbonize, bringing innovation in, that's far more relevant. Meaning, if you have a startup that would have whatever kind of amazing financial KPIs, but not delivering any strategic value, it depends on who you ask. If you would ask our CFO, probably he will say, yeah, I also take the money. This is also definitely a part of, there are a lot of people involved, right? And this is what I learned. It's right as everywhere. The more people involved, the more you need to kind of align and sure, it depends on who you ask, yeah? And I personally, from my background, from how I operate, I really, really focus on the strategic and innovation. And even internally, we sometimes call it like in especially maybe to my topics, the investment's cherry on the top. But I think we are all realistic enough. If it's just about money, do something else than startup investments, right? I don't know.
Yeah, but I think actually, when you say strategic, Georg, right, for me, right, that's kind of your investment strategy, right? You have basically carved it out. This is our strategy. This is the elements we want to, invest within. And then you invest in there, and that's a financial investment. So for me, it's kind of check mark already, right, with what you have said. So I think that's interesting. But maybe for some of the some of the corporates that are listening in that wants to build a CVC, who is then sitting on your IC? Who takes the decision? What positions do they have within REWE?
Yeah, and this is, for example, maybe then highlighting, let's say, this perspective, right? First off, again, obviously, when we do like in DD, when I go into the IC and then say, okay, this is an interesting case, that we need to talk about financials. And that's no-brainer. But nevertheless, again, the focus is on what we get out of the startup That's the same. I forgot to mention we also do, or I did. So we're not looking for new LP tickets, but I work closely with quite a few VCs. And we also did our LP tickets mostly because regarding access and learning and so on. So who's sitting in our IC? We have people from the board, from the C-level, obviously, and they are responsible for innovation, digitalization, and also the CFO. And we have people from strategy and M&A who's like responsible for the entity REWE Venture on board. So meaning that it's quite balanced view.
Jumping into my next question, right? And we have touched on this, right? So what I would like to learn a little bit more is, the principles around building your corporate venture entity, right? And we have the first dot, you are a strategic investor, right? We've cleared that. But what else do you have in there? How is this working? And with your team, right? How does your team within climate tech operate?
Yeah, again, the main approach is inside out. So meaning, and also this is how I started. My role is instead of going outside and looking for whatever I mentioned, trendy and topics, I started building the internal network. Again, 350,000 employees, quite a complex structure. It takes some time also to get the trust, right? I have a background in business and psychology, and I always tell that I guess the second part is more relevant for my work, right? The background in psychology. So I need to get the trust from people in the operations that I'm not just a new next whatever startup guy, like in a negative way and some prejudice that people have, but that I want to understand their standpoint, their problems in order to help them. What's in it for them? That's the main point I need to address. And this is how we work. All of the teams, or not all of them, but for example, also especially the R&I team, they focus a lot on venture clienting for our group, right? Really look for, do workshops with departments. They come more from this methodology approach, innovation, and so on. But then again, background mostly in software and digital solutions. So this is how we work internally. Externally, we do, for example, climate tech challenges. My main go-to, actually, also when I look at conferences, is mostly also because of resources. Is mostly I work with the VC and investor and partner network. So when I'm at a conference, I usually talk with investors instead of listening to I don't know how many different pitches from startups. Yeah, I think I don't know if this answers your question, but this is how we operate. We also have regularly our exchange with our funds, right? Also in order to learn with other partners to look where the next topics are that are relevant for us.
Maybe one thing that I would love to go back to, right, and that was a little bit when you explained about your own personal background, your education, right? Let's take the psychology part, because that's super interesting, right? Because corporate venturing is about, how do you collaborate between the startups and the corporate? Your job in REWE, in my opinion, is also to understand your core colleagues, right, and their needs. Could you share a little bit about how you work with your core colleagues, also in defining relevant investment areas within build and so forth? How does that go by on a daily basis?
Yeah, let's say I tried to find a good balance between like, hey, let's have a predefined, clear structural workshop process of getting you on board, and more like the pragmatic, hey, this is me as a human being, and I'm trying to connect to you now and to give you the understanding what my role is, what I want, and that I'm your partner and not someone that brings you additional workload. So this is, I don't know if I have like a concrete methodology for this. I think this is pretty much my sensitivity towards like when two people or more people come together, that it's all about communication, and that if I say A, the other person doesn't understand A, or right, and if it understands A, and so on, so on. So the whole complexity of communication, and each project dependent on this, right? For example, some weeks ago, the next pilot was a startup, very hands-on. I didn't take enough time to actually get the colleagues on board, the really operational colleagues, right? So, and when I talked to them, I kind of came up with saying, yeah, innovation, and it's really relevant for us as a group, and also the C-level and the board, they really want it, and they are on. And what I wanted to say is, hey, maybe this is also a good opportunity for your department to kind of get some attention, some exposure. But what they understood is like, oh, but they want it. Okay, then I have to do it, right? There's no other choice. And I tried to figure that out. No, I mean, you decide. And they said like, okay, to be honest, I don't think that this is a good solution. The startup is not really that good. I don't want to do it, but I have to do it. And I said, no, that's not. And then coming out of this, it's communication, moderating expectation management. That's the daily job. That's the daily job.
That's super interesting, right? Some anecdotes from my past. I worked for McDonald's Denmark once.
Oh, okay.
Luckily, I had been in store already when I was at university, just to make a little bit of extra pocket money, right? So I knew how to be in a store, right? But everybody in HQ, they had to go into store training for a week just to understand what it is that you do, right? And I think, my first investment that I did as a CVC was in Fleet GmbH in Berlin that today is closed down. But they were doing, cool transportation. And I went and visited a carrier in Frankfurt. And just, talking to a normal person that is running, he had 150 trucks, right? It's a huge company, right? And, I had to stand there and admire his work, right? Because it's super hard work. But it was also super clear to me, right? He spoke a total different language than I did, right? So I had to adapt to that, to basically understand the pain point and then move on from that, right? So I think that connection with the core employees is super relevant, right? Just popping this question to you, do you ever spend time in a REWE store or in one of your warehouses or stuff like that to understand these problems?
So let's say REWE stores is, as I don't look that much into these, cooling is actually operated, or let's say not responsible from the construction department. So this is why it wouldn't make that much sense to go into store. But let's say in general, this is, I 100% agree to you. Yeah, I have been to the warehouses and so on, and this is the 100% basis. You need to understand who's in front of you, and I think this is what a lot of young people don't get, right? They if you're socialized in the startup bubble, and then come to people who work, they have like their operational work 40 hour plus, so right, and don't come there and say, oh, this is the perfect, amazing, whatever, and expect them to be jumping on you. It's expectation management. Expectation management means the person in front of you has probably more than enough to do. Maybe he doesn't even know all his certain pain points even, or hasn't had enough time to define them. What he doesn't want is like naive young, and I'm exaggerating, right? Naive young people who just came with some startup hype from the next corner. And also what I learned is like, we are very traditional, let's say corporate, I guess, in some operations, and the assumptions that people have about startups is very often startup equals young people, no experience, and whatever.
But I think that's also sometimes what is needed to do kind of the innovation part. But I think maybe, another question within your core team. Is everybody coming from outside of REWE Group, or do you have somebody from inside of REWE Group?
No, we also have inside people from the inside. I'm actually the only one who came from kind of the outside, and also the only one was like, let's say everyone who's like leading the teams. Let's say my colleague also in food tech, he also had his own company beforehand, comes from the startup scene, and the same with me. So besides, this was just the education background, business psychology, but let's say my main background, I would say, is like doing business. I founded several companies myself, always bootstrapped, always very lean and pragmatic, not the whatever exit story. I think this is more education I bring in than the university education.
No, but I think that's a very, very good setup, right? Because also, there's nothing more, interesting in my opinion than seeing somebody coming from a business school getting into a CVC and have no understanding of how a corporate works. So I came into Maersk in 2018, and I was a naive VC with 10 years of background, right? I did not know how politics works in a corporate, and that's a big part of being able to do what you do today, Georg, in my opinion, right?
Yeah. And I think this is a question that we can elaborate on. Not sure if here or maybe in another, but it depends again. I wanted to say the success criteria, but then you have to ask, what does the success actually mean, right? What is the success of a CVC? But let's say whenever we are in exchange with the VCs and the funds that we are invested in, and that's also in every call, what I want to highlight to our employees in this calls, or not just employees, but also the board members, is always to highlight the differentiation. Because even VC talks about, I want to find this 0% unique founder exit potential and all this stuff. Yeah, that's the VC game. The CVC game is different. Because I want to work with the company, right? I want to work organic in a healthy development. And sometimes, as you know, right, maybe the VC game is not the most healthy one when it comes to building healthy companies.
And maybe when we are talking about, stakeholders and how you work with them, could you highlight some of your latest successful engagement with the group? Either direct or investments or, things you have been running internally or so forth.
Yeah, so maybe the one thing, again, very lean, pragmatic, because I realized the more people you get on board, the more complex it gets in a corporate. So we did like the first REWE Group Climate Tech Challenge, like a public announcement in the area of built environment / cooling alternative materials. So we got quite a few applications, obviously, also from a lot of VC partners. And this whole approach, for us, it's, doing a challenge is kind of normal, right? But I learned that it kind of got a lot of waves internally about the lean and successful approach, because we out of this, we had like 10 startups that I kind of organized in 2 90-minute sessions, each 15 minutes, presenting very clear structure. And out of these 10 startups, we generated firsthand 4 follow-ups in the sense of, okay, there might be cases, venture clienting, 3 times pilots. And now we are kind of in the area of 3 pilots that we are planning. Because then obviously it takes quite some time, but let's say this approach and the operational department has been like, wow, okay, so efficient. We screened so efficiently these quite few innovations, and from this we're going, and now we are repeating this climate tech challenge. And I started very, very lean, and now we're trying to get more people on board, also external partners, and to push it even more. And again, piloting is in my current scenario way more relevant, or maybe realistic, let's say realistic, than doing direct investments currently. Also because of the kind of hardware stage and whether, the development.
Funny anecdote, I was talking to a professor from the Danish, Copenhagen Business School, right? There's something when you actually look at the cost of running such programs compared to direct investments. I know, for direct investments, you of course have the CapEx, pure investment, but from a manpower perspective, if we can still call it that, right, then you actually tend to use a little bit less on operating it. I know all your direct investments are exciting. I know all your fund of fund investments are exciting, and thereby also, what they put in their portfolio. But are there any of your portfolio companies that you would like to highlight? And I know our mood changes as investors, right? We are in different stages. We move through the waves. But right now, what do you have of existing, investments you would highlight? And maybe if you could share a little bit of, what are you looking at right now?
Yeah, so again, the team that is most active would be the colleagues from food tech. They did quite a few interesting investments. I always have to be a little bit careful because some of them are not disclosed. Yeah, and so Project Eden. But I think Project Eden is a company that has been very, very interesting, a very high demanded round that we participated together with Planet A, which is one of our fund investments. So quite a few of the investments that they did together with some of the funds. And I currently look at cooling startups that where again the potential DD would be the next steps. But I also obviously don't want to call any names. But this would be as we are that we're putting a lot of time and energy into this topic, that if we would do like a direct investment in my team, this would most probably be the next topic, I would say, yeah.
I have one final question I will pop to you in a little while, but I just want to give you the possibility, if there's something that you haven't shared that you really want to leave with the listener and the viewer.
As general as it sounds, because you referred to companies that might build new CVC units. And I know it sounds too general, and I'm not the only one saying, but really, really take time to define your why of your CVC and align the people on this why. And there's a difference if you invest, depending on the objectives. What are the objectives? And if you really want to work with startups and in a corporate, don't just not underestimate the relevance of business psychology, but focus on it. Get people in your team that are able to moderate between startups and corporates, that are able to deal with people that are very sensitive towards communication, and don't think of that's just a small part of it. That's, from my understanding and from my perspective, the most relevant part. If you want to have successful corporations in the future and not just any whatever nice startup headline as we have it very often, that maybe doesn't represent the reality.
Thank you for sharing that. My last question is actually going to be two then. We are going to depend on the young generation in the future. So first question would be kind of like, what advice would you give to young people in corporations that would like to work with venturing? And then at the second time, maybe you can bake it into it. I don't know. Your most counterintuitive learning in CVC? Yeah,
I would actually, kind of repeat, I might even again emphasize even more. If you want to work on it, know that moderating these different expectations, also your own expectations, be very realistic. What you can achieve with startups, how long it takes, how maybe a lot of internal people will react to it. Don't just expect that all of them will applaud if you come up with new innovations. So not everyone is clapping if you talk about innovation. Yeah. So moderating expectation management. And yeah, actually the question of counterintuitive learning, I thought about it a lot actually. And I have been, or I try to be very realistic because of the sensitivity towards expectations and stuff. But still, I also learned that even if you have, as a large corporate, all these resources, it doesn't mean that speed is the result of the equation, And I always say, like, startup and corporates, even though corporates have way more, usually way more resources, the ratio towards speed and how to use these resources it's very, very interesting. Let's call it like this. And I always say, like, we know this picture of a speedboat and a big tanker. Yes, I also always say, like, we live in different time zones. Sometimes when I have like a startup, I don't know, after 2 days of sending me a pitch deck, they're asking, hey, about startup. I think, okay, be realistic. 2 days in a startup world is maybe 1 hour in a corporate world, and be aware of this ratio. Yeah.
Georg, thank you so much for sharing about venture in REWE Group. It has been fantastic to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.